Today we're taking a look at some Toronto Maple Leafs trade and free agent rumors. According to hockey insider Chris Johnston, this team could look extremely different this year. So who's likely to return? Who's likely to be moved? We'll discuss the possibilities. Plus, we have Game 7 tonight. We have changes in the front office in Vancouver, some more injury updates, and we have a big deadline for prospects to be signed coming up here shortly as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of NHL interesting news and rumors to take a look at today. First up, I just want to quickly preview Game 7 tonight. Another Game 7 in these playoffs. We've been treated so far with several in the first round. This will be the only one in round 2. Carolina does battle with the Rangers at home. Of course, this has been a homer series, as we'd call it. Carolina winning all 3 games at home, and the Rangers as well. So the road team has not been able to come out victorious. And if you look at the historical stats, Game 7s, the home team is quite heavily favored based on historical trends. Obviously, scoring the first goal is also pretty important. So we'll see how things go here tonight. For some reason, the Canes are remarkable at home and not so good on the road. It's really hard to wrap your head around, but that just seems to be the way things are going. I know typically, you wouldn't want to be going into Game 7 like Antti Raanta is with the, subpar Game 6 performance getting yanked. So you certainly would give the edge in goal to the Rangers and likely Vezina winner Igor Shesterkin. But the forecheck, the defense, all the systems, the way the Canes play, they certainly typically have a great deal of success at home for the right to go on and battle the back-to-back Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning. So we'll see how things go later on this evening. As I mentioned, we have a few injury updates. I know a few players from the Wild that's been announced that are having surgery. That's the defenseman and captain Jared Spurgeon and forward Mats Zuccarello. Both are having surgery for a core muscle issue. So that's about a 6-week or so recovery. Good news on that front is it shouldn't really interfere too much with them, their off-season training. They definitely should be ready for training camp. So good news on that front. We have some changes coming in the Vancouver Canucks front office. Nothing too drastic, but we know that the Sedin twins, Henrik and Daniel, were a part of the organization last year in a front office role as special advisors to the general manager. We knew that essentially they were very interested in learning various aspects of the business side of the game, and long term they weren't sure where they would fit. But after spending a year doing that, they're now going to have a little bit more of a defined role this coming year, and they will transition to a role in player development. So I think that should be a good place for them. The Canucks are also adding former NHL players, Mikael Samuelsson and Mike Komisarek, also joining that department as well. So it's a large group and some very experienced guys there to run and work in the player development department of their front office. So that's a little bit more of a defined role for them, which should be good moving forward. Of course, as I mentioned as well, we do have an interesting deadline coming up, and that's June the 1st, which is a cutoff for several prospects here to be signed, or they can essentially re-enter the 2022 NHL draft, or they can become a free agent. So if you take a look here, I'll give you a screenshot, courtesy of capfriendly.com, of all the prospects that are impacted here. There's not a lot of high-profile players, but you do have a guy like Tony Uutinen from Vancouver. Obviously, when he was first drafted, certainly, I think many people thought he would eventually become a player after, this amount of time especially. There's a very interesting case as well. The Minnesota Wild actually have a first-rounder in their 2018 first-round pick, taking number 24th overall, Philip Johansson. He's 22 years old. From Europe. So obviously, if they don't get him signed, because there is a special clause in the CBA with the first round picks, that if they make offers to sign them and they don't accept, that they will get another draft pick as form of compensation for that. So if they offer to sign him and he refuses, then they will get a second round pick in the upcoming draft as compensation for that. So we'll see what happens there. That's the only scenario that you really see. That's not a common thing that you see really at all. A couple other names to look at on this list that I think are somewhat interesting is the Habs have a prospect here from 2018 second-round pick, Jacob Olofsson, of course, the Swedish center iceman, never been signed, so we'll see what happens there. Calgary Flames have Ryan Francis, who's a pretty good-looking forward winger from the St. John Sea Dogs, of course, will still be playing here shortly in the upcoming Memorial Cup in June, so not sure what the status is there for some of those players. At this point, with the deadline fast approaching, I would think that if teams had intentions to sign them, that they probably would have been signed by now, and I wouldn't be shocked if we see maybe a couple of these players get contracts over the next couple days before that deadline kicks in, but it's not quite clear. Some of them, like I said, could get redrafted, or they could end up looking for contracts as free agents. Obviously, a lot of these guys are 21, 22 years old, so the odds of being redrafted are probably slim, more likely to go to the UFA route if they get an opportunity to get a contract from another NHL franchise. But we'll probably see a little bit of activity on that front here in the coming days. Now, as I mentioned, there's also some news on the St. Louis Blues, of course, recently eliminated from the playoffs. As teams lose out and become, on off-season mode, usually as they do their locker cleanout day, end-of-season media availability, we usually do get some interesting information to talk about as far as the future direction, upcoming things in the offseason. And there is belief amongst Blues reporters that Vladimir Tarasenko, even though he did request a trade last offseason, that he probably would prefer to remain with the Blues and play out the final year of his contract. He does have one more year left. St. Louis, like many teams, will have some tough decisions to make when it comes to salary cap. So, maybe they feel differently, I don't know, but there is belief that he would probably rather just ride it out and stay. Beyond that, we don't really know, but we'll see where things go on that front. It also appears to be mutual interest, according to Elliot Friedman, between the Blues and for David Perron, who is a pending UFA, to do a new contract and to keep him in the mix in St. Louis as well. We'll see, obviously, when it comes to Ville Husso, another very interesting name there. The young goaltender getting a lot of attention. I don't think we'll have any problem getting signed elsewhere should things not work out in St. Louis, but I know there's probably some, considering he's 27 years old and has limited NHL playing time. He did have a good season, but until goalies get more experience, I don't see him getting anything super long term. But there's lots of teams out there that are going to be, certainly in desperate need of some change, and he could be a name to look out for. I wonder if the St. Louis Blues will do their best to kind of keep him around or not. They also do have Charlie Lindgren in the system, who could possibly serve as a backup next year, and they also have young and up and coming goaltender Joel Hofer, who's kind of like your next potential goaltender of the future as well. So they do have pretty good depth in the position, which is one thing. But at the same time, like I said, you hate to see this guy just up and go after all those years of helping him learn and develop in the position here since he's been drafted. He's been with the Blues for a long time. And realistically, when Jordan Binnington first got called up and ended up going on that magical run and helping the Blues win the 2019 Stanley Cup, that opportunity really should have been Ville Husso, and most likely would have been if he'd not been injured. Most people don't always realize that. There was a point in the not too distant past before that call-up that Jordan Binnington didn't even have a spot in their farm system, that they had to loan him out to another franchise, and then they obviously brought him back afterwards. But still, there was a point, Ville Husso, I know, after the St. Louis Blues had their tandem of Brian Elliott and Jake Allen, and then Elliott moved on, and then Jake was the guy for a couple years. Obviously, he seems to do better in a tandem or as a backup, but when he was the guy, many thought that Husso was going to be like the next guy to take over. He was a goalie of the future at that point. Obviously, his development, you could say, maybe slowed a little bit, but then obviously, like I said, when that opportunity came, when the call-up was necessary to bring a goalie up, he was hurt, and Binnington ran with it from there, and then stole Jake's job, and became the playoff hero, got the cup. Of course, Jake then moves on afterwards, after one more season, and then Husso, still in the minors, gets the opportunity this year, and had a pretty good, solid year, obviously, but he's 27 now, so time will tell. It'll be an interesting time to see what the Blues do this offseason. Now, as I mentioned, I want to take a look at some Maple Leaf rumors and a variety of trades and free agency. Of course, we have a number of players to talk about, and most of the information comes from Chris Johnson and a little bit from Elliotte Friedman and other places too. But for the most part, Chris Johnson has his own podcast and also appeared recently on the Steve Dangle podcast as well, talking about the end of season stuff for the Maple Leafs and kind of giving his opinion on where this team goes from here. They played a little game with CJ called Staying or Leaving. And there was quite a few players that he expects from the Maple Leafs to not return next season. I mean, if you listen to a lot of media, the general consensus was probably that the Leafs don't need to do anything too drastic because they were so close to being not only successful in round one, but you can make an argument that if they would have been successful in round one, the odds of being successful in round two certainly increased as well, seeing how the Panthers played. And then seeing what's available possibly in the conference final, you have to think that if they get past round one, they have a real shot at going to at least round 2, 3, possibly to a conference final for sure, maybe even a cup final. It's hard to say, but that first round was so tough that they stopped short. Now, like I said, there's some people feel like we might see something significant. We've heard Elliotte Friedman talk about the potential Kawhi trade, where we see a real big popular name leave town in exchange for another kind of big popular player that maybe a different style to change things up in that regard. You've heard a lot of people say there's probably going to be the core is going to stay intact, and it's the outside, like the tinkering around them that we're going to see, which we quite often see, at least to a little bit of a degree from year to year, is more likely. But listen to the names that Chris Johnson felt were leaving, and for the most part, he answered these without hesitation. There's a couple that he kind of put into that I'm not sure category, but the both goaltenders, Peter Mrazek, Jack Campbell, he described as leaving. Mrazek, we know that the Leafs are going to do everything they can to get out of that contract because of how things went this year. But Campbell, he feels, is going to get paid too much elsewhere, and it just doesn't make sense that he's not going to be able to stay with the Leafs. So he feels that we're going to see a whole new goaltending tandem next year. He mentioned a defenseman like Justin Hall as leaving. Not a huge surprise. 1 year, $2 million. Didn't play all the time in the playoffs. Fair to say that his name was mentioned too in a lot of trade talk down the stretch between him and Travis Dermott. Dermott got moved. He did not. But I think it's probably time now that we're in the offseason. I asked about free agent Ilya Mikheyev. Again, not that the Leafs wouldn't want him. I think he had a good year, but we know that he had talked about getting a trade. Like he had basically requested a trade the year before, didn't get it. Not that he really hated Toronto or anything like that, but he wanted more of an opportunity. Thought he played well enough to play higher in the lineup, get more minutes, and it wasn't happening because of the depth in front of him. And obviously now that he's a free agent, he's likely going to be looking for a team where he can get that. And he had a good season too. So obviously, he's probably going to be too expensive to retain. So Mikheyev, probably gone. Another name he mentions is gone is Alex Kerfoot, who he figures is going to be a tradable piece too. So, I mean, that's, two forwards in Kerfoot and Mikheyev, a defenseman in Hall, and both goalies in Mrazek and Campbell that he feels are going to be gone. Now, of course, for players that are staying that had any question marks around them, one of them, this was obviously recorded before he signed, Mark Giordano re-signed, but he did say he felt Giordano was going to stay and give a hometown discount in some capacity. I don't think he probably thought it would be as much as it was, but obviously that is something that we did see happen. And he also feels that forwards Pierre Engvall and Wayne Simmons will both likely be back. Engvall obviously played pretty well, I think. Simmons, though, he did say he doesn't expect him to go anywhere because of the clause in his contract or whatnot, but he's not sure how much he's going to play. So, I wouldn't be shocked if he's quite often a healthy scratch. If they might have to put him through waivers depending on their cap situation. Hard to say what kind of role he's going to have. And as far as a couple of unknowns to him, he wasn't sure on defenseman Ilya Lyubushkin, who was acquired from Arizona. He didn't really have a good feel on that one. And same with Jake Muzzin. Muzzin, he hummed and hawed pretty hard when asked if Muzzin would be back. And he did say that they absolutely love Jake Muzzin. That, it's not just on the ice, it's off the ice. And we're talking, he said, management loves Muzzin. His teammates love him. Like, it's just coaches love him. Everybody. He's just such a well-respected guy that as much as, he could see maybe a chance he moves, but it would be a big blow to the room if it did happen. But that takes us to another point that we heard Elliotte Friedman talking on the new 32 Thoughts podcast today, talking about Rasmus Sandin. And now Sandin and Liljegren need new contracts this offseason. They're both restricted free agents. And Rasmus Sandin, apparently, according to Friedman, that they're on his side of things, with he and his agent have some concerns. Now, he said it hasn't reached the point that they've asked for a trade, but they do have concerns over his role moving forward, given the fact that they, after Giordano re-signed, they have 5 left-handed defensemen now on the team. We know that TJ Brodie, being a left-handed defenseman, primarily usually plays the weak side on the right, so he's usually on the right D. So that still leaves 4, which is still a logjam. And if you're going to play Riley, Muzzin, and Gio, there's no room for Sandin to be a regular in that lineup. And that's obviously not good for his career development. So clearly, the Giordano signing has kind of thrown things to be concerned for him. Obviously, we saw Sandin play more earlier in the year, but as it came down to the stretch and in the playoffs, he wasn't really a factor, wasn't really inserted into the lineup there. So you got to wonder what they might do in that regard. I'm sure Sandin's not a player they want to lose, but if they don't move Muzzin and they go into training camp with all those defensemen, you have to think that his frustration is going to start to climb, and maybe he will possibly ask for a trade if he has to wait too much longer to be given more of an opportunity. I think everybody's probably fair to say that feels that he's ready for a regular shift. So I don't know, really what would be holding him back. But Jake Muzzin is certainly a player that many feel could move. But to complicate things is he has trade protection in his contract. So where would Jake Muzzin be okay going? Is this a player that you'd want to have that difficult conversation with? Would he maybe go back to Los Angeles? It's rumored that LA might want to bring in a left shot defenseman as well. Like they've been talking about maybe being interested in the much younger Jacob Chychrun. So of course, would they want to reunite Muzzin with Drew Doughty? I don't know if that's something they would really consider. But it would, if they want to trade Muzzin, it's not going to be easy. I don't see them doing a buyout. That's not going to happen. That would be too expensive. So really, at the end of the day here, I think the Leafs are quite likely to look very, very different next year. Now, of course, most people within everybody that I've heard talk about it or write articles, if the Leafs do decide to do something more significant, I think most feel that William Nylander is the most logical player that they would consider moving. At this point, it's kind of hard to say with any kind of certainty that they would do that. But I think if they go down that road, he's the guy. Tavares is not movable, no move clause, expensive contract. They're not trading Matthews, and I don't see Marner going anywhere either. I think Nylander is definitely that player should they choose to go down that road. But we've heard them say like they're not necessarily doing a core player trade this year, but they look at their core players as being much more than the big 4 that many consider in that group. They also consider guys like Muzzin in that group. So, to a degree, he's been there long enough that Kerfoot's almost in that group too. So, even Riley's certainly for sure in that group. So, obviously, they could attack the core a little bit, but not necessarily the biggest pieces of it. But if Campbell doesn't return and Mrazek is bought out, you don't really want Mrazek being the starter next year, then who's the goaltender? Right? That's the thing, right? Because when we're talking these rumors on who's coming back and who's going, a lot of this is based on contract. Like Mikheyev's a free agent, so if he leaves, there's nothing coming back. If Campbell leaves, there's nothing coming back. If Kerfoot or Hall go, well, there could be a return because they would be traded because they're under contract. Mrazek could be traded or bought out. He's the one player I think is a buyout's possible if they can't find a trade. So it's difficult to really kind of pinpoint where things go. So there's not much there that's going to get you a goalie. You have some prospects you could consider. Do they hang on to Nick Robertson, Matthew Nyes, their first round pick? It's really difficult to say where things go on that front. The name John Gibson has been brought up as well. So you have to think that, maybe he will be a trade target if Campbell leaves. There is some... it does make some sense. And on the right shot defenseman too, if you get Brodie playing a right shot defenseman, what if Lyubushkin doesn't return and you trade Hall? You have Timothy Liljegren, obviously expected to be there. There is some talk, and it's hard to say really, I don't know how much truth there would be to it. Time will tell. But there's a lot of people out there that think that PK Subban could also be another veteran player that comes into Toronto on a fairly cheap NHL contract for a short term, with an opportunity to try to win a Stanley Cup. There's lots to talk about PK. I'm not sure I really see that one myself. If Lyubushkin doesn't come back, I don't know that PK Subban is your answer to that. But there's lots of question marks. And I know there's lots of people that feel that change with this team is going to be minimal, but it has potential to be huge and in a variety of fashions here. So certainly, like I said, with everything that's going on, if CJ is right and all these players do go, and the ones that are maybes, if they move, you could see Campbell, Mikheyev depart via free agency, and you could see trades involving Kerfoot, Hall, Muzzin, and Colin Blackwell's another one that was asked about. He said he wasn't sure. I think there's probably, maybe he returns. I don't know that there's really much, I think maybe probably not. So it's going to be a different looking team for sure. And honestly, like I said, Nylander is the guy if they do something significant, because like I said, if they need to bring in a top goalie to really secure things back there, what else do you have that you can trade that it's going to get the return? It's either you give up a guy like Nylander or you give up a guy like your package of prospects. You're going to end up giving up your first-round pick and either Matthew Nyes, Nick Robertson, something to that effect. So time will tell, but the Leafs are going to be a very different-looking team if Chris Johnson is anywhere near accurate, and I do feel that he makes a lot of sense in what he's saying. So let me know your thoughts, and we'll discuss everything down in the comment section. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.